Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is John from Business Review, an NS Media company, and I'll be your host today. It's our pleasure to have Infosys with us today, who will be presenting this webinar entitled, Being Resilient, That's Live Enterprise, Next Generation of Personalized Pharma Driven by CRM. Today's guest speakers are Arielle Trzcinski, Senior Analyst serving Application Development and Delivery Professionals at Forrester, Makela, CEO of Fluido, and Ravinder Singh, Senior Industry Principal, Infosys Life Sciences. I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar platform On24. You'll notice that this webinar is browser-based, so if you disconnect for any reason, please just click on the link that you received via email to rejoin the session. In order to ask questions, you can send them in via the questions widget. Just type them into the box at the top left-hand corner of your screen and click submit. We will allocate some time at the end of the session to address any questions or thoughts that you may have. Please use the yellow help widget if you require any assistance, and you can move, resize, and maximize any of the windows in front of you to get a better view of these slides. For now, it's time for our first polling question. So for the audience, you can click on any of the options listed below. The question reads, how does your company define the customer? Possible answers are HCPs, payers, health insurance, patients, or all of the above. So that question reads, how does your company define the customer? Perfect. Now we'll move on to our second polling question. So this question reads, where in the patient journey are you most engaged? Possible answers are advertising to patients and HCPs before treatment, at time of initial treatment, when a patient gets their script, as a patient initiates and continues treatment, e.g. care management support, or monitoring pharmacovigilance. Again, the question reads, where in the patient journey are you most engaged? Great. Thank you all for participating. We will have a look at the answers at the end of the session. But for now, please allow me to welcome Arielle.
Great. Thank you, John. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So my name is Arielle Trzcinski. As John said, I'm a senior analyst at Forrester Research covering healthcare. I'm also joined today by Kai and Ravinder, who will be helping us go through and learn more about the use of CRM in driving patient engagement in pharma. So today for you, I'm going to get things started by talking about how we can drive customer obsession and personalization in pharma using CRM and digital experiences. Then I'll pass things over to Kai, who will help us understand an outside perspective and what we can learn in pharma from other similar initiatives in other industries. Finally, Ravinder will be closing us out talking about patient-centric approach to pharma marketing, right? How pharma marketing playbook is changing from not just focusing on the HCP to also being a more patient-oriented approach. So let's jump in and talk a little bit more about how we can think about redefining the customer, how we think about better understanding the new healthcare consumer amid the pandemic that we're all facing right now, and then also going through some case studies to learn about what lessons can be learned from others that have gone down this path ahead of you. So as I talk to many companies in healthcare, pharma included, as well as providers and health insurers, what we find is that many companies in regulated industries, right, that are selling frequently through intermediaries, struggle to define who is their true customer. In many cases, we find that pharma has focused on the HCP historically, but now recognizes that ultimately the patient is the end customer with whom they are interacting with. And so we encourage you to define the customer as the end consumer of the product or service, right? And use HCPs or intermediaries that you're working with almost as extensions of your brand, right? And helping advocate for your brand, your pharmaceutical therapies, right? For these patients, these end consumers. And the reason for this is because we see that empowered consumers demand new experiences and value from healthcare, and more specifically from pharma. So as we look at empowered consumers, which frankly in our current climate, we are seeing a rise in demand for digital experiences out of necessity, but also out of the influence of other brands from outside industries, forcing that customer to rethink the way that they engage with their pharmaceutical company, the brand that of the drug that they might be taking, or even thinking about taking a more proactive approach and better understanding their health. So what we find is that nearly 2 out of 3 online adults, so this means that an online adult is someone that has been online in the past week when we conducted our survey. But what we found is that 2/3 of them are willing to try new things. Furthermore, we know that consumers are interested in finding more information about their symptoms, and 65% have reported that they will go out, do their own research, whether it is for them or it's for a family member or even a friend that might be, they may be the primary caregiver for. Right? And this is, again, being further contributed to by the fact that we have much broader, digital experiences influencing our lives. We have been trained by Netflix, by Lyft, Uber, right, to demand things immediately, right? We don't want to wait for things if we don't have to. Furthermore, we know patients are taking a much more self-interested, self-educating and self-caring approach to their health, as well as the health of others. We recently heard from Google that there are over 1 billion searches a day for a medical question. And this was before the pandemic. So certainly we know that consumers are searching for information online and trying to determine, what is the best therapy, what therapy options are available to them, but also where to go for care. Now, as we see, amid the pandemic, convenience and trust are more important than ever. And so as we think about consumers having these disjointed and fragmented approaches to going out and trying to find more information about their health, unfortunately, that journey becomes more fragmented. And so we have to have a way of holistically tracking and monitoring that patient. And so we see CRM emerging in healthcare as a way to enable pharma specifically to harness the data that is available on these patients, as well as being provided directly from these patients, and act as a way to deliver insight to not only the internal pharmaceutical company, but also the HCP, the care managers, and family members that may be caring for these patients. And this will help us drive more personalized experiences that are more tailored to the needs of these individuals. So I want to level set on, what does the care journey look like for our typical patient? And I encourage you to also go out and do your own customer journey mapping. This is meant to give you a high-level view. But as we think about a patient's journey, right, they initially may sense that something is wrong, right, that they need some sort of medical help. The first thing that they do, however, is they go out and they gather information. And this may be that they're turning to social platforms, right? Turning to Instagram, turning to Facebook, turning to their community, their family members, their friends, as well as to Google, as we mentioned before, right, and searching for more information, right? What does this rash mean? What does this headache mean? Then they finally go and they seek professional help from an HCP. But this time before they seek professional help is incredibly impressionable, a pivotal moment for a brand to be able to influence that individual and help them better understand and self-educate what options are available. That has been transforming the conversation that patients have been having with their HCP. They now come armed with information and say, I would like this drug because I know that it's going to help treat, this specific diagnosis that I think that I have, right? People are self-diagnosing. They're coming up with what they think the potential therapy may be. And unfortunately, the HCP is now in a different situation, trying to help that patient navigate those different options that they think is the right option, and help them understand the insurance aspects of that. And so as we keep going through this journey, right, we see more consumers seeking information, finally going to their HCP, maybe getting a recommendation that's different, ultimately, continuing through the journey, right? That initial HCP appointment is not the end. It's very much, still the beginning of that journey. And so there's this incredible opportunity for pharma to be able to continue that conversation with patients, right? We have to continue to support them in terms of potential side effects, right? Or thinking about how do we continue to provide things like care management to that patient, right? There's a missed opportunity if we don't look at being able to continue to support this patient on after they initiate the treatment, after they continue through the experience and understand and maybe experience some initial benefits or side effects, right? There's an opportunity to continue to champion the brand. If there's an opportunity to intervene, if they have a side effect that might be a negative consequence of the treatment, being able to intervene and better understand, perhaps there's some other influence, right, in their life that is helping contribute to that side effect and being able to course correct on that protocol. Furthermore, right, we have this opportunity to better understand if an individual is going to abandon treatment, right, and intervene. This is much more timely if it's in a digital engagement application versus trying to rely on data that might be lagged, right? Things like claims data or refill data that may be weeks behind when an individual does decide to abandon the treatment. Furthermore, that information does not give us, information on the root cause of why the individual left the treatment plan. Was it due to cost? Was it due to a side effect, right? And so having digital engagements that are powered by CRM allow us to get a line of sight into what is happening to this individual in this moment of time. So as we think about this, and you are looking to, be able to compete with some of the individuals that have gone before you, right, and use CRM, but also thinking about how to build the business case for implementing CRM at your own firm. I want to talk through a few case studies so we can talk through who has leveraged CRM and some of the successes and potentially failures that we have seen go before you. So in this case, there was a global biopharmaceutical company, rather considerable size, that leveraged CRM to improve customer retention. It also helped them gain better insight into the health outcomes for that individual, as well as intervene as the patient experienced side effects. The client ultimately needed to improve medication adherence. They had a significant problem with drop-offs, of patients no longer continuing the therapy and not having a line of sight into why the patient had abandoned that treatment, but also missed opportunities to intervene and help course correct and get the patient back into compliance. Ultimately, they had multiple digital engagement solutions that they had built initially across multiple markets. So they had a very fragmented approach initially to this problem. Ultimately, they were able to go with one CRM that offered them the ability to have a centralized platform that was able to leverage more global governance, but also meeting the needs of the individual local markets as well, right? This helped them achieve care coordination, be able to intervene with patients that potentially had side effects or were going to abandon the brand and help bring them back into the fold and feel more supported by that brand. Our second case study comes from outside of pharma. So this is from our healthcare CRM research. And what we found that was interesting is that the problem that this company was facing, is not dissimilar from pharma. They were trying to find a way to provide a call center rep with quick, easy access to sensitive information, right? And ensuring that they didn't have to limit the capabilities that CSR might be empowered with, right, to be able to answer questions quickly for patients. But ultimately, they had to find a way that, did not expose the full medical record for a patient. Initially, they were using the EHR and the call center, and they realized that they truly needed a customer relationship management platform that helped them understand the patient at a 360-degree view, but also understand how do we quickly provide information and answer questions in a way that we have to restructure the data, right, and be able to make this something that's oriented to the frequently asked questions from our patients. Ultimately, it helped them reduce training time as well. So there was considerable savings in terms of reduced training. It reduced the churn in their customer service department, and also enabled customers to leverage a community platform. So one of the things that this company did is they moved from a patient portal to leveraging a community platform that was provided by the CRM to help bring patients together. As we think about community, right, community is something that we know is being used by many direct-to-consumer brands, and is finding its way into healthcare, right? Communities provide a way to help inspire brand advocacy, both early in the journey, but also as customers go through the process of completing a therapy, right? They become advocates for the brand, and some of your best salespeople, right, and sharing their stories with other patients and having patients identify with them, right? That, my problem is very similar to yours, right? And this worked for you, right? So it must work for me. Ultimately, in this case, Curology uses CRM to help coordinate patient communications, right? Provide updates around things like shipment, but also changes to the therapy. So there's a level of transparency, which also inspires trust in the brand. So as you go forward, I want to share with you a few key questions, right, to keep in mind as you think about advocacy. You want to make sure that you are inspiring personalization, and that's going to come from key questions that you have to ask across that care journey, right? So when you think about awareness, the beginning of that journey, right, what prompts customers to consider your brand and your therapy as an option? Do they see something on social media? Do they see an influencer advocating for your brand? As they continue through that process, what other ways can you capture the ability to keep that customer engaged, right? Is it care management, reaching out and understanding when a patient potentially has a side effect? Is it integrating with a medical device that helps you uncover potential data that may indicate a contraindication of that therapy? Or furthermore, what pain points exist just across that customer journey that you could potentially, ease some of the friction for that patient and help inspire them to be advocates for your brand out of the ease that you provide for the customer experience. So before I turn things over to Kai, I want to leave you with a couple of key takeaways to keep in mind as you leave the webinar later today. First, you have to rethink your definition of the customer, right? It's truly the patient, right? When you think about ultimately who is consuming this product or this therapy that we have created, and making sure that you are asking what questions, can we ask of this patient and of our broader supply chain to ensure that we're uncovering pain points for our customers and reducing the friction in that journey. Finally, when we think about digital experiences, right, they create a more engaged customer. They drive brand loyalty and improved outcomes. But you have to make sure that these experiences are built along the care journey, right? You have to embed into the natural process and journey that those patients are already following. And with that, I will turn things over to Kai.
Very interesting presentation and great insight, and I can see a lot of connections to my presentation. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants on my behalf. I'm delighted to take part of this health and care and life sciences seminar. It's wonderful to see so many of you so interested in these topics. As said, my session is about outside-in approach and what we can learn from other industries. My name is Kai Makela, and I'm the CEO of Fluido, which is an Infosys Salesforce practice in Europe. And what we do is we transform how our customers connect with their customers and stakeholders in digital using Salesforce technology primarily. Why do we bring outside-in view? We are all kind of riding this digital wave that is shaping the way we work and how we engage with our stakeholders. Each industry is unique and has its unique processes, but many of the things and approaches when it comes to stakeholder and customer engagement are really universal and can and should be applied across industries to gain competitive differentiation. Looking only at your own industry will just limit the opportunity you have ahead of you. Some of the other industries have been more early adopters than others, and what we have seen is that maybe the regulations and data security related things have kept the pharma a bit risk cautious and behind others. But what we are seeing now is that the regulators, consumers, and US companies are ready for the change. While this session is a bit short, I'll bring some of the observations and thoughts that could inspire and give ideas for you, and then Ravi will bring you a more pharma context on the same topic for you. Let's see. So to start with, as I said, we are riding this digital wave, and we see three key elements driving this forward. The first, it's consumerization. We as consumers live in a global village. We are connected all the time and everywhere. We think we are making our own educated decisions, but really we are all the time influenced by subtle and less subtle messages of brands and influencers and the community around us. One of the examples I would like to bring is Adidas. For me personally, it doesn't matter for the performance point of view if I run with Adidas or Nike shoes. But when I look at the values and the feeling I get from a brand, that ultimately influences whose shoes I end up with, or at least I think so. But I'm influenced by the brand anyway, even beyond my thinking. So being connected digitally in commerce and in marketing automation, Adidas can test messaging real time, provide next best offers, and this way also drive value to retailers by providing the right products at the right time to specific markets. So it's not just Adidas themselves selling online, but it's also driving the value for the retailers. And as we heard from Arielle, the majority of the customers are willing to try and explore new things, and 65% make their own research before making decisions. And I can see this specifically interesting in the health sector. So there's a lot of room for you to influence where possible. The next thing is the expectations of today's customer. We live in the age of the customer. They can choose who they work with, and they have the right for the trust, and they can expect an epic experience. Otherwise, they'll move on. It's really important to remember that each of the touch points we have with the customer, whether it's in person or in digital, create an experience. And these experiences become journeys, and these journeys become stories. So what we need to do is we need to work really, really hard to win the trust at every single customer touch point, so that these stories that they are telling are positive and told by loyal advocates, inspiring other people. As what we have seen now is that what applies more and more in the B2C world is strongly starting to apply in B2B relationships. So this would have the, in your industry, the HCPs, physicians, hospital scientists, and the likes, very applicable in that space also. And then a third point is the servitization, especially what we see in manufacturing and media, the coupling of the product and subscription is something, a very big driver. So in media, the devices and entertainment is coupled, and in manufacturing, it's something called preventive maintenance. So manufacturers are no longer selling just the product, but they are selling a life cycle of services to prevent interruptions and failures that cause problems for businesses or disturb the experience of the customer, or more importantly, again, the customer's customer. So we need to think quite far in even manufacturing space when someone is buying something that they are not actually buying for themselves, but they're actually buying it to service their own customers. So this servitization then really enables growth, consistency, and predictability in revenues, through subscriptions. And this really becomes a win-win-win by looking beyond the product, or I would say in your industry, looking beyond the pill. How can you enable healthier lifestyles, connecting products and services, and that way win the hearts of the consumers? In all of these areas, we see the shift in life sciences, but some of the other industries are ahead of you. But I think there's a lot of learning points you could get from talking to the other industries. And how we look at this is that it's sort of a iterative life cycle in which we need to create a model that supports the business to be digitally enabled as a foundation. And then as we move forward, we digitally engage with the consumers, or if you'd like to call the patient. But as Arielle was saying, let's go away from the patient to talk about the consumer or the customer. What really is the key is the experience for both employees and the engaged customer. As without the great employee experience, you cannot have a great customer experience. And with Salesforce Customer Success Platform, we have made this possible multiple times working together with our customers. To start with this, I normally like to use a metaphor of a small village shopkeeper or bakery owner. But in your context, I think a local pharmacy in the small village works really well. So if you think about a small village and there's a pharmacy, the pharmacist knows each customer intimately by name. They know their children and their hobbies and birthdays, and they even know the illnesses of the people. So the relationship is really trustful, deep, and fun. In the global scale, as we're operating now in a connected life, the customers have become bits and bytes in different systems. And it's impossible for us to gather a 360 view of the customer and have that similar deep relationship. So we need to have a structured relationship management in place, whether it's our customer or the other stakeholders that we work with. And now, as we are in this unique era that through applications and devices, we can gather experience and behavior information. We have a vast amount of data. It's a huge gold mine in our hands to understand how our customers are experiencing and behaving. But the challenge then again is that there is so much of it. According to a recent study that I read, over 73% of the data gets unused. So it's not humanly possible to process it. So what we see now is that these intelligent, automated, and connected platforms really come in to help. As the foundation for the growth is in place, then we can progress to the automation. And this is often considered as kind of a marketing automation. But what it actually is, it's serving and being relevant to the customer or stakeholder by providing the right data to the right people at the right time. Customers will engage and share the digital footprint when we are relevant to them all the time. Daimler is one example. They are an amazing global brand that has traditionally sold through dealers. And first effort for them to digitally connect with consumers was in 2018, and they had good results. They are getting leads through from their dealers, and with the consent of the customer, the Daimler can then process the digital connect and nurture and do the heavy lifting for the dealers with marketing automation and drive consumer engagement and advocacy. The added value for the dealer then is to service the customer and be the local connect with the customer and create the advocacy and inspire them. And you know, they are also regulated industry, so if they can do that, why couldn't you? Similarly, in your industry, all the services provided by your networks. And I see this model as a big opportunity for you by having service collaboration to drive consumer experience, and by you getting the leads and inciting them, and then help the service partners close the customer. Yeah. Sorry, now we have a wrong slide. Okay. Okay, we have a really bit long slide, but it's okay. So so regarding the connection to the customer, another example I have is a globally leading cruise line, and what they really noticed that traditionally the cruise attendants, so the tourists, were buying the travel through the agents, and the people came on board, they enjoyed the trip and left, and there was no connection between the cruise line and the customer. By getting digital, then they started to connect from the purchase throughout the trip and post the trip. And that really kind of changed the way they were able to sell to the customer and stay connected after, but also for the customer to be able to be connected and get a much better experience preparing the trip and enjoy the trip. Okay, so there was a little bit of a mess with the slides, but let's move on. So to wrap up, so HLS is not alone. The digital wave is shaping everything across the industries. So the consumerization is driving everything. Servitization creates more revenue and engagement and experience opportunities, and experience is driving everything. With patient centricity taking center stage, the biopharma has the opportunity to learn from digital transformation experience of these other industries that are kind of heavily consumerized. What's really important to remember is that this is a journey. There is no end in sight. The quick wins are there, and we like to do that we win small value points with our customers, so we experience and then build on that. And these experiences and quick wins then will lay a foundation for the transformational success. And an extremely important point is that the systems of today are way too complex, so we must make these complex systems much more simple and elegant value drivers. If that's done, then we become much more agile. We have much sort of time to value when things change very rapidly with different elements in our businesses. And last but not least, the transparency and trust are the keys. Our customers are willing to engage with us if we are transparent for them. What do we collect, and how can the things that we collect from them help them on a personal level? But they also need to be trustful, and they need to have the 100% trust that you, as a company, respect the data that they provide, so that doesn't go outside and it's used in the way that it's been promised. So that's it for me. I hope I was able to bring you some insights of our experience with customers. And next up, Ravinder Singh, who is a senior industry principal at Infosys, will discuss with you the patient-centric approach to pharma marketing. Over to you, Ravi.
Thank you, Kai, for giving us insights and learnings from other industries. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. This is Ravinder, and I head the Life Sciences domain practice. So the first and the foremost, I'll actually borrow the experience that Kai mentioned, which says the experience becomes journeys, journeys become stories, and that is extremely relevant for us in the pharma industry today, given the patient centricity focus that we have. And I'm going to talk about the CRM in the age of consumerized healthcare. Having said that, let's look at some of the key forces that are shaping the reimagination of how pharmaceutical companies now engage with their customers. First and the foremost is the patient's behavior, right? Arielle touched upon it, and I'll just take it from another perspective. Patients are taking control, and what that means is they are taking control of their health and conditions. The self-management is here to stay, and it is driving results. And this is further empowered or fueled by the rise of digital technologies, closed-loop engagements, and also medical devices, which are now giving giving rise to very high-grade healthcare information at disposal. If we look at the other side of it, they are becoming more and more pertinent to decision-making in the medications. So Arielle also touched upon it. There's a much higher, amount of conversation that patients and physicians are having in decisions regarding the medications and therapies that patients consume. Having said that, this is a new relationship that we see between the HCPs and the patients, and this relationship is driving the consumer behaviors in much different manner what it used to be. Coming back to the kind of results that this is delivering results, and if you look at extremely different therapy areas, there's a significant improvement that we see in clinical outcomes for diabetes and about 39% in the process variables like adherence or retention onto the therapy. So this is delivering results. A meta-analysis in oncology also reports that a similar kind of outcomes are delivered in the quality of life as well as in the self-efficacy, extremely important parameters as far as cancer patients are concerned. In summary, if we look at it, patients are empowered, patients have access to data, information, and knowledge at the tip of their hands, and this is creating a data-rich patients and populations. It's extremely important to underline the word populations because eventually we will be dealing with large set of patients and how we actually drive their behavior. So what does this mean for the pharma companies? Pharma companies are extremely good at understanding the diseases, the progression of these diseases, how these will actually impact, the medication will impact these diseases. What they fall short is understanding of patients as their consumers. And that's a gap that needs to be fulfilled going forward. So this is where we see the first change in the force, which leads to reimagining how we conduct, let's not say CRM, but XRM, because you are now dealing with multiple stakeholders. Having said that, there is a new player on the block in the healthcare ecosystem. So it's not just payer, provider, and the pharma companies. It is also the tech giants. And all the tech giants, as we know, they have significant plans to make an impact in healthcare. Now, why this is relevant is because this brings in a new player altogether who is extremely empowered to use the consumer information. They know how to do this. They have these channels available. They have the AI, machine learning, and understanding of consumerization extremely well done. And that's a gap with pharma companies. So that kind of leaves us with these tech players who will possibly start playing a much larger role in being a distributor or a consumption channel for healthcare services to consumers. So brings in a completely new player in the health ecosystem altogether. Let's look at the third dimension altogether. The third dimension is in terms of how the value-based reimbursements are shaping the change. The value-based reimbursements now require faster and credible data pathways to real-world data. So more quickly we can actually prove the efficacy, and with better evidence, this allows us a better return on the medications that we provide. And finally, we all know, this is no secret, where physicians are challenged with their time. We saw a significant, about 90% reduction in face-to-face time in last 6 months, and largely also impacted by COVID. And the projections are that we will be at about 60 or less by 65%, even post-COVID era, with regard to how physicians will have a face-to-face time with the pharma representatives. So this is transforming the consumption of information by physicians in a much different manner to digital channels, as well as community learning. So they actually turn to more and more of communities trying to understand the new information that is available to them. So the traditional channels are wearing out with regard to the access that we have to the HCPs. So what does this mean? So with these forces in place, there is definitely an opportunity for pharma. And when we say an opportunity, it's an ability to create a win-win proposition. And what that essentially means is that if we are able to create a care coordination or be a part of the care coordination in the new relationship that HCPs and patients have, that helps us, everybody. First and foremost, it helps us drive outcomes with patients, with physicians. It helps us assist and be a part of the HCP as well as physician journeys. And at the same time, it allows us to gather very high fidelity data where we start understanding our patients as consumers, and then we can drive behaviors. And whether these behaviors are in, during the therapy, whether these are behaviors in creating advocates. The other opportunity for pharmaceutical companies is also looking at changing or shifting the CRM left to the product development stages rather than when we actually get into the approval and therapy areas. And that essentially allows us access to the patient, pharma, and HCP interaction and journey modeling early enough. And if you're able to understand it at that point in time, it gives us extremely powerful information to drive and control patient behaviors and ultimately driving outcomes. And finally, how do we look at personalizing patient and HCP experience, which again further enhances our ability to engage with the patient physicians and also influence and create a brand value for ourselves. So create advocates early enough, and how do we create rich consumer HCP data and continue to gain insights and improve the brand value, and then finally deliver an evidence which helps us with reimbursement. So this is the kind of win-win situation that pharmaceutical companies have an opportunity to build through the extended CRM, bringing coordination across the different consumers that they deal with. So how do we get this done? So if we are looking at a number or the key foundation for this is the predictive targeting or foundation of data. How do we create a data-driven, multi-channel, coordinated, and personalized? A lot of acronyms, but extremely important in the world that we actually live in. This is what consumers expect from us, whether these consumers are patients, whether these consumers are HCP for us. So how do we deliver it where they need it? So it's not where we want to deliver, but where the consumers need it. So first and foremost, how do we create the predictive targeting? Once we have created the pathways to new age data, generate deep insights into patient journeys, and start looking at predictive intervention modeling, look at a holistic view of what influences patients' outcomes, more than just taking the medication, whether these are lifestyle parameters, whether these are any other parameters that we need to start influencing and driving behaviors. Similarly, gain insights into HCPs and segment to predict the adoption, how will they consume information, and how will they actually eventually turn into advocates. And build multi-channel responsive engagement. And I underline the word responsive. Arielle also touched upon this as well. If you look at how do we make it contextual to the HCPs and the patients, this is not something that we can get right in the first go. So it's important to be adaptive, and that can only come if we can gain a quick micro feedback and gain a high-speed micro feedback in terms of what adaptation that we need so that the message resonates. At the same time, it is actually creating an impact and measurable impact on our consumers. Think service design, and that service design is essentially day in the life, not just covering the clinical aspects or the medication aspects, but also looking at holistically whether these are logistical, educational, emotional support that is required, and how do we converge all of this onto patients and make this available through digital channels. And that kind of creates a very unique ability to drive behaviors and turn them into advocates. And finally, create a multiplier effect through social channels. Patients are turning to social channels, HCPs are turning to social channels, and they can have a multiplier effect of the brand that you create in a closed loop engagement with them. Having said that, again, there are some early movers, and here is one of the large pharma companies who has taken on a data-driven journey in XRM. The first and the foremost thing is they have actually built channels into patient outcomes, focused on oncology drugs, and they are leveraging the patient data. And they actually receive this patient data in a much shorter time. So the key to this is they actually get it almost closer to real time, the data from the patients. And once that data is available, they actually use this data in terms of microsegmentation of physicians and patients and how they behave, and eventually target them with regard to decisions. This has actually led to about 10% increase in market share. Although there are technology advantages of how quickly you can bring in the data, but the key is in terms of how they have been able to gain a higher market share through a closed loop and understanding of the consumers of their medications. So finally, to conclude, if we look at the trends which are here to stay, the voice of patients will continue to amplify. It's not going to stay here, it is going to further amplify. And that provides us with a unique opportunity, build new channels to patient and HCPs, important to engage both of them together, and that also gives us a unique channel to influence both of them. The care coordination is an unmet need in the healthcare system today, and if we target that space, and extremely important to do it digitally, given the way healthcare is poised for a consumer-driven experience. Transition of channels to turn digital and social for HCPs, to some extent, this is already happening. However, it's time to kind of speed up all the initiatives that have been thought about and bring it to forefront. So that we can have a digital channel to physicians and start rethinking on the social channel strategy. Pharma has been a little bit conservative in the social channel, but how do we kind of amplify that and accelerate that is an extremely important part. And finally, as Kai said, this is the learning that we get from other industries, how technology transformation, and this is through platforms, how do we kind of think about servitization? While we have actually looked at a holistic picture of the patient, this itself allows us to servitize our drugs and go beyond the pill and build platforms that can actually interact, talk, and create a seamless experience across the patient journey, covering and bringing together clinical, logistical, educational support to them. Thank you. And with that, I'll hand it back to Jonathan for the next proceedings.
Thank you very much for that, Ravinder. So we can now have a look at the results from the polling questions we had at the beginning of the session. So here we go. The first polling question read, how does your company define the customer? And we have an overwhelming majority for all of the above, for patients, payers, health insurance, and HCPs. And for our second polling question, here we had a mixed result. So the question was, where in the patient journey are you most engaged? And we have a split between at time of initial treatment, when a patient gets their script, and as a patient initiates and continues treatment, e.g. care management support. Perfect. So that now leads us on to the Q&A section. So just a reminder for the audience, in order to ask questions, you can send them in via the questions widget. Just type them into the box at the top left-hand corner of your screen and click submit. So we already have some questions that have come in already. So the first one I'll ask is, how do we get maximum return on investment from CRM technologies?
So who should take that?
If I take Perhaps that, so I can start, and then
yes,
Yes, I'm happy to start with that. So what we've seen in talking to many pharmaceutical companies across the industry is that they frequently will start with an initial use case. In some cases, it is engaging patients after treatment and continuing to support them throughout treatment through care management. But then we also see the proliferation of additional use cases, right, and continuing to create new value, right, and thinking about new ways of engaging in touch points that help you collect more data, for example, on that patient that you otherwise may have had to purchase, or otherwise may have never been able to obtain from the patient. And so slowly, as you evolve those use cases, we start to see more and more value, right, being derived from the use of CRM. Furthermore, we see this from achieving technological efficiencies. For example, the example that I shared around the large global biopharmaceutical industry or industry giant, we heard from them that they had multiple digital engagement assets that were very fragmented, and they were able to consolidate essentially and remove some of those technologies that were not built on a CRM, and were able to consolidate that approach, use something that was centralized, right, that was compliant and help safeguard data, but also help them save millions of dollars by removing some other technologies that were in place previously. I would also add that when you're thinking about CX, there are a different set of metrics, right, that you have to incorporate and start to hold yourself accountable to. In some cases, we see NPS and CSAT being the most frequently chosen, but in other cases, it could be the elimination of pain points and friction in the customer journey, for example, right, and the questions that we shared across the customer journey in our presentation, those can also help you, uncover what are your beacon metrics, right? What are you going to hold yourself accountable to as a firm, and using the CRM to work towards achieving those goals and metrics, which will yield achieving perhaps a different way of thinking about ROI. But Kai,
so my feeling is that also, in addition to everything you said, is that CRM is the key for the customer 360 view. So it shouldn't be viewed in isolation as a CRM, but there's so many other areas and systems that can integrate to it and feed to the CRM. And then the CRM can serve as the community platform, connecting the HCPs, the patients, and yourselves, then also in a community where you can engage. We see this happen a lot in other industries where all the stakeholders get connected and they can share and communicate with each other.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. We have another question here. It reads, pharma companies are investing heavily into patient engagement initiatives as part of patient centricity initiatives. How do you see CRM in light of these initiatives?
Yeah. For me, CRM is the cornerstone. It's the absolute core of all of this. So the really it's hard to explain, but it's the heart and core of everything that you would do in these areas.
Yeah, and Kai, I completely agree with you, right? We talk about CRM being the backbone to any sort of digital patient engagement solution. And it is a way of being able to ensure that you have that centralized view of an individual, right, of a patient, so that you are collecting, whether it's data from a medical device, it's from a care manager, it's from a family member, right, that is also providing valuable insight into how that patient is doing on your therapy. You have to have a way of bringing it together into that patient 360, as you were saying, Kai, right? And that comes from the CRM. It doesn't come from all of the individual experiences, right, or assets that may be deployed to patients.
Yeah, so I'll take another view onto this. If you look at the patient engagement initiatives in pharma, they are normally targeted for a specific purpose, or they'll be actually designed for a particular therapy area or a particular brand. When we look at CRM, it kind of now starts giving you a perspective or a view of all the different touch points that a patient may have, in the journey that they have had, possibly not one, but maybe multiple with your company. And that's where CRM kind of holds, all these threads together. So the approach to look for is, can I actually put, solution systems and infrastructure in place that I can actually identify the patient through all the complete journey that they may have with the biopharma over a period of time, whether this is through trials, post-therapy, or during the therapy, and can actually look at those interactions. And that gives us a much richer backbone, as Arielle mentioned, from a CRM standpoint.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. So don't forget, you can still ask questions via the Q&A widget in the top left-hand corner of your screen. We have another question here for you all. What are your thoughts on tracing user journeys and creating marketing campaigns in life sciences, which is a highly regulated industry?
For me, if I take the stab at this, this is a difficult one. As you mentioned, it's a regulated industry, and but I always come from the point of view that if we can provide value, the regulations can start to change also. So the regulations get stronger when we start spamming and we are not being relevant. So if we look at some of the patients and maybe patients of chronic diseases, absolutely, when we can be connected to them, provide them valuable information how they can live and with the disease, then I would see that we can also start changing the industry and changing the regulations to open up so that we can really kind of go through these valuable journeys and support the customer, which is a patient.
Yeah, so if you look at another perspective to it, right? So let's identify who's the user here. And user can be a high-risk patient, and are we now starting to look at, identifying our target market? And what are we driving at that stage? At different user journeys, whether you are actually starting to think about whether, we are increasing screening, whether we are raising awareness, the user journey needs to start possibly at that point in time, and it, again, needs to be data-driven. So I think my, take on this would be that, tap into your real-world evidence kind of initiatives. Look at, identifying who the potential users and targets can be, and then eventually look at not necessarily a marketing campaign, but possibly an awareness campaign, which drives and channelizes your end consumers into, quote unquote, a decision-making or somebody who engages with the HCPs in a much empowered manner. And that's where your brand value can essentially be driven to kind of, make an impact in that HCP and physician, and ultimately driving a prescription.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. So we have another question here. Social media content generated by patients is proliferating at a magnitude that is becoming a cornerstone of the big data movement in pharma. However, the challenge lies in developing the strategy to access this new pool of intelligence about patients, their concerns and needs, which is available in social media. What are your thoughts on this?
So that was a long question. So what we typically see with our customers is that the social media content shouldn't be treated in isolation from the other content and other consumer or customer data. So somehow you need to build a strategy where and have the systems in place where you can bring the social media data into your systems where you have customer data anyway. And then you can start to identify, okay, who are my influencers? How can I connect with my influencers? And then also the kind of what's really key is that as the kind of whatever you are capturing from social media, that it gets also responded in a sort of a regulated way, whether it's a one-to-one or if it can be a public response. But what we have seen is that quite often in some of the industries, the public responses are not something that you can do. So you need to go to the one-to-one engagement then and have the applicable persons from your team to do that.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Kai. So thank you very much. And just a reminder, if you didn't get your question answered today, they will be available to be answered in the coming days. So that just leaves me to thank Arielle, Kai, and Ravinder for what was a great presentation, and to Infosys for sponsoring this session. To the attendees, you will receive an email shortly telling you how you can access the on-demand version of this webinar, or you can access this through our website, which is www.business-review-webinars.com. We look forward to sharing further webinars with you, so please do keep an eye out on the website just mentioned, and follow us on Twitter @BRWebinars for daily updates, and join our LinkedIn group, Business Review Webinars. Thank you all once again, and I hope you all have a very pleasant day.